Hello everybody, the following story is based on Creepy Shift, Roadside Diner. It's developed by Night Shift Team and published by Red Limb Studio. The free version is out on Steam right now, and the full version is scheduled to come out on October 28th now. I played a bit of the demo last night, and I did have quite a bit of fun. And you know I just wouldn't throw you guys to the wolves. Check it out. It is a lot of fun. I do want to thank both the developer and publisher for asking me to narrate this story for them. And the links for the game and their YouTube channel is going to be in the description of this video. It was early autumn. A dense fog was slowly drifting over the marshes along Route 285 in New Mexico, occasionally revealing the reflection of a strangely orange moon. Before midnight struck, I lit up my favorite red Marlboro and stared with disgust at the roadside diner. I was going to spend the entire night there, washing dishes and doing some minor inventory work, whatever that meant. I decided not to complain after all. The job was exceptionally well paid. In just one night, I could earn enough to pay off 2 installments of the loan that had tied my hands, along with the unplanned fatherhood. Place looked ordinary. Small shack covered in metal siding with a tacky decor and the stench of burnt grease. There are plenty of places like this around here, and they all look the same. The interior didn't surprise me either. Checkered tile floors, a jukebox, a long counter, and tables with fake leather booths. A haven for truckers and teenagers whose mothers don't cook for fear of ruining their freshly painted nails. But one detail did strike me as odd. In the kitchen, on one of the walls, there was a painting of some pastor holding a sickle with candles burning underneath it. Looking at his particularly grim face, I remembered an old man who had sat next to me on the bus ride here. He smelled a bit, but not enough to call him homeless. When he found out I was spending the night at this diner, he turned pale. He started talking about some great danger, a blood moon and a curse. He even handed me a piece of paper with the rules I was supposed to follow. He looked quite similar to that clergyman. Maybe they're related, I muttered to myself. The bullshit family. And my voice echoed through the empty diner until the mocking grin faded from my face. The old man from the painting and the old man from the bus really didn't faze me. Been on this earth for 20 years. I've seen plenty of religious weirdness. My uncle has pictures of saints even in his bathroom, and there are more crazies than normal people on buses. If there are any normal people at all in this messed up world. I decided to leave this philosophical puzzle for another time, and I got to work. It was well past midnight when I started mopping the floor. For some reason, the jukebox suddenly turned on, and I felt a chill in the air. I went to turn it off because, well, to put it mildly, I'm not a fan of country music. After I managed to stop the hillbilly tunes, I heard a strange noise coming from the basement. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was more like some animal trying to get out. I had no intention of checking it out. It's not what I'm paid for, I thought, and I put my headphones on. Just as I managed to ignore the weird situation, something else happened. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, as if someone was standing right behind me. I spun around quickly, but no one was there. I glanced around the room uneasily, then took off my headphones and sat down at the bar. The feeling of unease made me remember the rules the old man on the bus had given me. I still had that piece of paper in my pocket, and here's what it said. Number 1, all lights must stay on all night. Number 2, the jukebox must not play. Number 3, draw lines of salt at the doors and the windows. Number 4, find holy water and keep it with you at all times. Number 5, make sure the candles under Pastor William's painting don't go out. Number 6, they will try to deceive you. Trust no one. Speak to no one. Number 7, at 3:33, hide in the broom closet and don't come out for 5 minutes. Number 8, do not leave before dawn. I read the rules out loud, thinking that by doing so, they'd sound silly and ridiculous. But honestly, I didn't find it funny at all. So I got back to my duties, and it seemed more sensible than playing out dark scenarios in my head. It's just a shame that when I walked into the break room to mop the floor, I stumbled upon yet another dose of sacred rituals. On the desk was a glass bottle, and above it, a piece of paper with a short prayer was taped to the wall. May this water, in service of your mysteries, effectively drive away evil spirits and ward off the enemy's possession. And if anything threatens our lives, may it flee in panic when sprinkled with this water. I also found a printed prayer to Pastor William, but I didn't get a chance to read it because I heard the honk of a horn twice and the sound of a van driving away. I took a deep breath, remembering that one of my duties was to unpack the pallets and carry the boxes to the basement. I wasn't thrilled about it. Before getting to work, I lit a cigarette, found the right keys, and for reasons I couldn't quite explain, I pocketed the bottle of holy water. When I stepped outside, there was an eerie silence. The only sound was the occasional rustle of the courier tape, which the wind was peeling off the pallet of boxes. I opened the basement, and when I turned on the light, I was surprised to find that there wasn't any animal trying to get out. I also noticed that the room was dimly lit, so I went back for a flashlight to feel a bit more secure. The job wasn't pleasant. The heavy and large boxes blocked my view as I descended the narrow stairs. The basement was damp and moldy. I couldn't see the mold, but I could definitely smell it. I wanted to finish the job as quickly as possible because with each trip down the stairs, the basement felt increasingly repulsive. I stacked the boxes carelessly, and as I was carrying the last one, I accidentally turned off the light with my shoulder. In complete darkness, I set the box down in front of me, and when I managed to find the switch, the bulb flickered briefly and then shattered. I started to panic and almost bolted outside, but then I remembered the flashlight. My hands were shaking with fear, and when I finally managed to turn it on, the harsh beam of light revealed something that shouldn't exist. It looked human, but it probably wasn't. The creature was draped in rags, with limbs twisted in impossible angles, and it began moving toward me. I saw it reach out a hand, and I heard a terrifying, almost hissing voice. After a brief moment of paralysis, I snapped out of it and I started to run. I quickly tripped over and fell hard, and for a split second, I was certain it would grab my leg, but it didn't. Instead, I heard the sound of a chain and an enraged scream of helplessness. Without looking back, I got up, dashed upstairs, and quickly locked the door behind me. I nearly fainted. My legs felt like jelly and my heart was pounding faster than it ever had before. I entered the restaurant, and the first thing I did was start searching for salt. I didn't care if anyone thought I was an idiot or a lunatic. I poured lines of salt along the doors and the windows, made sure all the lights were on, and lit new candles under Pastor's painting. I sat down on a bar stool, leaned against the counter, and buried my head in my arms. Am I going crazy? Or is this just some goddamn hallucination? These questions tormented me. I was trying to make sense of what had just happened. I thought maybe it was all due to exhaustion and stress. I hadn't been sleeping more than a few hours a night for weeks, sometimes not at all. And to put it mildly, well, I wasn't thrilled about the unplanned fatherhood, and the sheer weight of responsibility was wearing down on my already fragile mind. I took a deep breath. I downed a few gulps of booze I had stashed in my pocket and got back to the rest of the work. When I disinfected the kitchen floor with a special cleaner, I accidentally rubbed my eye with my hand, and it stung like hell. Shit! Do I always have to mess something up? I cursed out loud, deliberately breaking the overwhelming silence for a moment. I couldn't see a thing for a while, but I could clearly hear that damn country music I hated so much. In a split second, I rushed through the kitchen doors and sprinted toward the jukebox. My stinging eye blurred my vision, and the rising panic made it hard to do even the simplest tasks. Then I felt that cold air on the back of my neck again, so I reached for the bottle of holy water and spun around. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I noticed the figures staring at me through the window. And that's when I leaned against the jukebox and accidentally turned off the music. When I looked back toward the window, the figure was gone. I went to rinse my eye. I was now certain this place was dangerous. I don't know why or how much of it was my own madness versus reality, but I wasn't about to ignore even the smallest signs of danger. While unpacking the cans and various jars of food, I remembered the prayer to Pastor William in the break room. I'd never heard of this guy before, wanted to learn more about him, so I decided to read it. I quickly realized that the text wasn't a prayer. It was some kind of freaking exorcism. Expel demons and the spirits of non-believers. With your powers, subdue the beasts. And other phrases like that made me want to sit in the kitchen corner and cry like a child. Instead, I took a swig of vodka, lit a cigarette, and decided that if I made it through this shift, I'd leave this place far behind. When I finished counting the stock, I heard a horn honking, which immediately put me on edge. I was told there'd only be one delivery tonight. I wasn't planning on going outside, and the mere thought of unpacking another pallet and going down to the basement triggered a mild panic attack. I decided to go to the window and check out the delivery. To my surprise, I saw nothing. No pallet, no truck driving away, nothing. And that's when I remembered the 5th rule on the old man's list, and I read it aloud. They will try to deceive you. Trust no one. Don't talk to anyone. I shook my head in disbelief. It's funny how quickly you could change your opinion about someone. The old man in my mind was no longer a crazy person, but someone who might actually save my ass. But dawn was still far off. I glanced at the clock hanging over the front door, and I lost the last shred of optimism I had. It was 3:15, smack in the middle of the worst night of my life, and I was already on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I realized that to survive, I had to stick to the list and keep my mind occupied, even with the most mundane tasks. I lit candles under the painting, loaded some dishes into the dishwasher, and poured out the old grease from the fryer. When I saw it was approaching 3:30, I poured salt lines along the door to the broom closet, grabbed the long kitchen knife, and I locked myself inside. I looked at the list, took a deep breath, and cursed in disbelief, summing up my current situation perfectly. The clock struck 3:33. A chill that penetrated my entire body washed over me. I also heard shuffling sounds coming from the basement, louder this time and definitely more terrifying, as if someone had gone into a frenzy and was desperately trying to escape. Fear paralyzed me, and the knife I held in my hands felt as if it had gained several extra pounds. Suddenly, it grew even colder, and I started shaking uncontrollably. Maybe that's why I accidentally dropped the knife, which clattered against the tiles with a loud, dull sound that echoed through the entire restaurant for a few seconds. Those few beats, and what followed, felt like an eternity. But then I heard the footsteps. Someone had entered and was slowly making their way toward me. I was losing my mind. I could hear two metal objects scraping against each other, and I was certain that someone or something knew where I was hiding and that I was about to die. The figures stopped at the door of the closet and stood motionless for what felt like an eternity. I could hear its breathing, long and steady. I waited for it to grab the handle and kill me, but it didn't happen. Whatever it was slowly walked away, likely deciding it wasn't worth staining itself with the blood of some random inventory guy. Meanwhile, the shuffling in the basement turned into thunderous pounding and howling. I thought I heard a desperate cry. "Please, no." I quickly realized the basement door had been opened, and a struggle ensued, accompanied by terrifying screams. I covered my ears, but it only slightly helped calm my trembling body. I sat there huddled for a few more moments, trying to imagine I was somewhere else and that what was happening in this cursed diner was just a bad dream. Then, suddenly, silence fell, broken only by a metallic sound and the slow footsteps descending the stairs. The chills subsided, but I didn't leave my hiding place for a long time. Eventually, I gathered the courage to take a look around the diner. I might have said that the place looked normal, except for the deep 2-meter-long gash on the bar counter. For a moment, I thought I might have to pay for it, but then I realized how utterly insignificant and foolish that was in the face of death, just like most of our problems. I drained my metal flask and lit a Marlboro. I remember looking into the smoke curling up from that burning tobacco and saying to myself, "Don't worry about it. What matters is that you have enough smokes to last till morning." I was so mentally exhausted that I started laughing uncontrollably, only to burst into tears moments later. Strangely enough, it made me feel better, and I managed to pull myself together. But time dragged on endlessly, and dawn still hid behind that cursed blood-red moon. I glanced at the list again, then made sure the salt lines at the doors and windows were intact, checked that the lights were on in all the rooms, and lit more candles under the painting. I had a feeling that Pastor William's image looked slightly different now, but I didn't dwell on it. Instead, I decided to finish mopping the floor, which turned out to be a good idea. The task effectively occupied my mind for a while, and every so often, I'd go to the window to check the surroundings, but the visibility was poor. The thick fog still hung in the air, intensifying the feeling of isolation from the rest of the world. It was an unsettling sensation, but I found a strange comfort in it, as if I'd been surrounded by fog long before taking this job. Now, I'd always liked solitude, helped me escape the problems I brought upon myself, and that's probably why I often took extra shifts where I had to fend for myself. An hour passed. As I began pacing chairs on the now clean and dry floor, I heard a loud crash from the dumpster behind the restaurant. I slowly approached the window, but didn't see anything. Instead, my attention was drawn to the window pane, which was trembling slightly in its frame. When I strained my ears, I got the impression that a group of people was approaching. But then, in the distance, I saw several pillars of fire growing larger and larger by the second. I didn't want to know what I was dealing with. I knew some danger was approaching and decided to hide again in the broom closet. But just then, I heard frantic knocking at the front door and a panicked child's voice. "Help! He's going to kill me. Please let me in." And without thinking, I ran to the door to open it. But to my surprise, there was no one outside. All I found was a bone-chilling cold, and in a split second, I realized the grave mistake that I had made. There was nothing I could do as something with unimaginable strength grabbed me by the throat and dragged me out into the gravel lot. I felt fingers crushing my windpipe and sharp nails slicing into my skin. I couldn't move a muscle, and perhaps already resigned to my fate, I closed my eyes. Still conscious, I felt my body being dragged against the ground and then pinned against the metal siding of the building. It was as if someone was deliberately keeping me alive, savoring the sight of my agony. And finally, after several painful and violent jerks, I became motionless, like a stone thrown onto the surface of the water, eventually sinking to the bottom. I felt the grip loosen on my throat, and I gasped for air, desperately filling my lungs as I opened my eyes. And I saw the ghost of a woman, her pale face covered in thin scars, and her ever-waving black hair falling over her blue lips. Her gaze was filled with a suffering and anger, and she stared at me in silence until she began to hiss and whisper something. And that's when I realized that the bottle of holy water in my pocket had shattered, and the sacred water was trickling down my injured thigh, mixing with my blood. I felt I could move my hand, so I reached into my side pocket, pulled out a wet shard of glass, and stabbed it into the ghostly woman's arm. She let out a terrifying scream and disappeared, leaving me to collapse onto the ground, straight onto the porcelain flower pots. Limping, I made my way back inside, and with the last of my strength, I locked the door behind me. I then collapsed onto the floor, losing consciousness. I lay on the blood-stained checkered tiles like a beaten pawn, doomed to be defeated from the very beginning. It's hard to describe what happened next. However, I strongly believe it wasn't just a dream, but a message displayed to my consciousness somewhere between life and death. When I opened my eyes, I didn't feel pain or fear. I was laying on a wooden floor in a small church, and as I stood up, I saw Pastor William. He was speaking from the pulpit, almost shouting about the great evil of the savages. As I stood, smoke clouded my vision, and suddenly I was no longer in the church, but in the midst of a bloody assault by white settlers on Native Americans. I witnessed atrocities that I'll never forget. I remember at one point trying to escape the vision, but I couldn't. I couldn't even close my eyes. So I looked up, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. The next image I recall was of an enslaved Native American woman and child being held in a barn. In the light of the blood-red moon, I saw a white woman trying to reach them, to free them, and to save them from death. However, the woman didn't notice that her daughter, a little girl dressed only in a nightgown, was following her. The girl stumbled, fell to the ground, and began to cry loudly. And in the final vision, I saw the pastor to whom the woman and her child were brought, and he was informed of her attempt to free the savages. It turned out that that woman was his wife, and when they were alone, an argument and struggle ensued between them. The man struck her several times, and when she spat at him, he fell into a deep rage, killing her and their child as it tried to help its mother. And then I woke up, and return to living proved to be exceptionally unpleasant, likely due to a dozen broken bones, knocked out teeth, and several deep open wounds that I only learned about later in the hospital. As soon as I started to regain my senses, the police arrived, but since I was just a foolish 20-year-old, I decided to tell them the truth. What was the result, you might ask? A month-long stay in a psychiatric hospital under the watchful eyes of doctors and a regimen of medication. Fortunately, they discharged me after a month because they liked my reticence and 100% attendance during TV game shows. When I was released, I was finally able to see my son. My girlfriend and I left in search of better money and a peaceful life. Although I found a job and, well, we lived well, I couldn't find peace. I spent sleepless nights searching for information about the place where I'd spent the worst night of my life. What I managed to discover matched the visions I had while laying in that pool of blood. Over the years, I also delved into knowledge about paranormal phenomena and spirits trapped in the world of the living. And all this led me to where I am now, to the moment I'm writing this story. In a few hours, I start another night shift at the Roadside diner off of Route 285 in New Mexico. But this time, I'm not going to do any inventory work, whatever that means. I plan to find the remains of Mary Smith and her child and burn them to ashes. I believe that's how I'll free her from the centuries-long tyranny of that damn barbarian.